Bitcoin's at it again. 57K, that's where we're at. It's been a pretty crazy last couple of days. Weekly close has been super interesting. But I mean, the real question on everyone's lips, is this it? Are we going higher? Are we going lower? Is this just ridiculous? I think the answer to the ridiculous bit is yes it is. But I mean, hopefully by the end of this episode, we're going to share some data, share some technicals on, I guess, what I think is happening in the market right now that might help, I guess, paint my picture on how I see things. And the way we're going to do that is look at some technicals, look at some fundamentals. Option chains data can be quite interesting to see what the smart money is thinking right now. So we'll touch on that. And also I thought we'd tie in some fundamentals or, just, I guess, some more sentiment-driven data around what search volume trends have been like in recent times. And really just talk about where the next targets could be for a reaction. I mean, there's some interesting things to share. So I'm just going to dive right in, actually. The overall chart of Bitcoin, we're really getting up into this upper nook of price action. And this is where decisions, it gets quite interesting waiting to see what's going to happen, I guess, next. When you're sort of playing around in the sand in these lower regions where unfortunately no one's interested, the chance of going higher when you're looking at technical structure like this, as long as you're making higher highs and higher lows, it's a lot easier to get a position, stay in a position. But it's when you get up to these areas, you're kind of wondering, cool, am I taking profits? What am I doing? Is there going to be a colossal dump that takes it back down to sub 40K again? So many things going on, right? But I think the best place to start with this is to look at the ETFs. Now, go on about this like night and day so often. The ETFs matter because it is essentially the easiest way to track how is the big money entering the market, and for once they're entering the market by actually purchasing spot Bitcoin. So it's driving demand for the actual underlying asset. In the last 7 days, we've seen 25%. Well, I guess we've seen enough Bitcoin purchase net inflows to account for 25% of all new Bitcoins that have come into existence. Now, that's a pretty interesting stat because if we roll into the Bitcoin halving and we still see the same sort of velocity or momentum with the overall Bitcoin flows, you could have essentially TradFi outfits purchasing half of the new Bitcoins that are being created out there. And that doesn't even include if obviously those amounts increase over time. But again, on the opposite side of the coin, if we start to see flow slow down, maybe that does take the tailwinds out of this run. I do think if we start to see big volume days, but we don't from ETFs, we see big volume days from ETFs, but we don't actually see the amount of Bitcoin flowing to change that much. That could be a potential sign of selling in good news. So everyone might perceive the highest levels of ETF volumes traded to date, but if they only added 50 new Bitcoin to the balance book, that could be the first telltale sign. But for more recently, the 26th of Feb, we saw the lowest amount of GBTC selling. So this could potentially be an indication that the selling pressure that has been existing is really stepping off the gas. And we saw, huge inflows from the Fidelity product, from the Grayscale product. And, we've even seen bullish signs from good old-fashioned Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy adding another 3,000 Bitcoin over the last course of 2 weeks. So it's really easy to see why all of this, idea of scarcity, the whole idea of Bitcoin coming more mainstream, even when we look at something like web traffic data, we aren't even seeing, search volumes really kick up to the right like we have seen prices. You look at search volumes, we're at almost all-time high prices, but the search volume ratings are still way down in the pits. It really sets up a really confusing scene as to what to do as an investor, right? So, I mean, overall, I guess at the end of the day, if you are bullish long-term, it really doesn't change your view. But if you're thinking about, DCAing, getting in, it does make things a little bit interesting. What might be helpful is to look at, again, like I mentioned, options data. This kind of looks at where and how the smart money, generally speaking, is setting their bets as to how they see the market panning out. And the 29th of March is the contract date that's got the most amount of notional value locked up. So in terms of volatility, around this date or leading up to this date is probably when you could expect a lot of these contracts settled. But the biggest peak is at 60K. When we look at a chart, 60 to 65 here, I guess you could say. Looking at a chart that's still sort of saying there's enough upside to really get up into this left shoulder, I guess you could say, if you're looking at it potentially from another perspective of price. So that could be I mean, who knows? I mean, if we're looking at options data, it could be where price settles before it turns around and we start to see some sort of cool off. But the cool off might only take us to back, maybe the next structural support level, which would be, I would say, that fib level there, the 618, 48 and 48,500, just because of these previous highs. Like, we probably could see price stop here, but there's a good solid amount of previous highs around this level. So, that's quite a bit potentially that people might be having to sell to get through leading into post-halving. But that being said, if we keep up this velocity on ETF purchasing, I mean, it's not unreasonable to think that a new all-time high comes in pre-halving. So that's just something to watch as well. And who knows what the charts will do if that happens. But we just have to take it one step at a time, is I guess what I would take away. And, if we're looking at Bitcoin this week, the weekly close was actually quite terrible. We put in probably starting the week, I was looking at it quite cautiously. We were already up in these premium levels. We put in a swing failure, and the monthly candle also was looking a bit weak as well previously. So a swing failure there as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, the fundamentals seem to be just too strong to I guess fade right now. I guess is the way you'd look at it. With the daily close that we just had, I consider that a bullish close, and going into tomorrow's trading as well, if we close above 34,899, give or take, depending on the exchange and the chart that you're looking at, again, another bullish close again. So you would just be assuming for continuation, just because we aren't. The market's pricing in higher closes every day, so that's something that's pretty important with this move of expansion that we're seeing right now. And we look at charts like TOTAL3, which I've been tracking for quite some time on the channel. The altcoins are loving it too. So ever since we had this bear market high breach broken last year, we came back and retested a key high in February. We've just seen expansion on this chart as well for the last 3 to 4 weeks. And most notably, we are at the mid-range of this cycle high, cycle low. So if we were going to see any consolidation, we might start to see it this week as well. But at the same time, if on a lower time frames, we start to really get above this pretty convincingly, I would be looking for a move up into this sort of key previous level, which is like an order block region, previous lows before we broke down, for a potential place where the market cap might be running a bit hot on altcoins. And that's when I'd like to see, I guess, eventually some sort of cool off before it resets and goes again. And that's probably leading into the bull market at that stage. Well, the Bitcoin has broken out into new all-time highs territory type of breakout, I guess, in that regard. And another thing that's going to help us is a weaker US dollar. So we've been talking about this as well. So just to talk this one through again as well, we can take the current high that we have, map it against the low that was put in most subsequently. We can see this range throughout here. So from here, expectations would be run it to the middle of the range and then the top of the range. We got pretty close here. But from here, there's every chance that we still could go higher. But I guess what I was alluding to in my last week's episode was this particular high put in pretty ugly price behavior. So usually you'd want to see a pretty concise and close above that previous swing high, similar to here. And similar to here, I guess you could argue, where we had strong daily closes above those levels. This is weekly, strong weekly closes above those levels. But we've had 1, 2, 3 weeks now where the market seems to not be interested in wanting to close above that key level. So for me, the week that we just closed as well was, I guess, a bearish week, just closing lower than the previous week. And now this week, again, I'd expect an expansion move to the downside. And then maybe it's that second or third week after that we could be forecasting a swing up, which may be timed nicely if the markets are running a little bit hot to see a pullback across altcoin markets. But that's a bit too far to forecast ahead. But for me, this week, I'm coming in thinking that the DXY is coming down further again. And that's, again, hopefully bullish signs for the crypto market as well. But I mean, this one could quite easily just sort of loop and turn around as well. So we just have to be a little bit careful. But in terms of like assessing underlying conditions for me, it does look like there's a higher probability from my perspective and what I'm seeing for the US dollar to, I guess, fall lower than go higher at this stage. So it really paints a pretty interesting picture for how the whole market's sort of sitting right now. We can look at altcoins like ETH right now. Usually a good one to watch, tracking how the rest of the altcoin market is going to move once Bitcoin and ETH have moved. Heading into these premiums, heading into the 618 fib level, which we've been talking about. This previous high as well, weekly candle as well. Probably not a bad area for maybe market players to be taking profits, looking to reduce size. But there's also nothing to say it couldn't just be the next base to see accumulation before the next move higher. So that's kind of how it could also be seen as well. And we start to look at assets like Solana, where we were expecting, if the markets looked weak, an opportunity for it to pull back and start to maybe fall to lower valuations. And a lot of people feel like they missed Solana. I guess the reality is, if the rest of the market is looking strong, it really doesn't make much sense to say, oh, Solana is still going to go down. Really, I'd expect it to continue to perform and outpace the rest of the altcoins again, maybe for a second time. It was a real convincing run the first time round. So I mean, it's really interesting just watching it now. Like, there's potentially some resistance levels still to be breached and broken for Solana, but at this stage, I mean, if we can still keep holding its structure, higher high, higher lows, can't see any reason why this doesn't now track up to the next levels. So the 618 and the 786, so anywhere from 163 to $205 from here would be reasonable targets to look at. But also, if we do start to see any sign of weakness, we just want to be pretty mindful as well that alts are going to feel it a lot more faster than Bitcoin. But at this stage, the bearish case for Bitcoin really is, I guess, any sort of days where we start to form price action similar to this. We might see, while we saw price fall here and rise, there's nothing to say we don't get that exact same move that we saw there. Let's see if this works. Oh yeah, kind of like that. That's a terrible thing to do. I'm sorry, but I just did it. If we see something like this around these price highs, I mean, that's when you could start to see some serious weakness and price move pretty quickly. And then altcoins will, while Bitcoin might bleed a little bit, altcoins could really, really start to move to the downside quite quickly. So that's the only thing I'd say to be careful from a bearish perspective. But at this stage, there's no price action to really say that on a daily time frame here at least. That was starting to show weakness. The weekly, like I mentioned, we did show a bit of weakness last week, but we've already this week busted higher. So if we were to close above, what's this? That is 53,000. Let's just call it flat 53,000. Different brokers will be different. I would still have no reason to be bearish from a technical perspective. And having this fib level here so close, I do assume there might be some people front running profits at the moment, but I would say there's still liquidity around there as well. And yeah, that's the interesting thing right now about the whole market. It really is a bit hard, because as good as it looks, it sometimes does look, it doesn't take like much for us to fall down and look terrible. But to be completely honest, it's been looking like that ever since we pushed into this level here, the 48,553 mark there. So it really has been a long period of, is it going to do it? Is it not going to do it? And that's where we've really lent on things like the Bitcoin ETF flows for some sort of sentiment check on how things are looking. And I still think if we get selling on good news, so again, if we start to see high ETF volumes, but not much movement in the actual ETF inflows of new Bitcoin being purchased, that's going to be a crack in the trend for me that I'm going to be watching. That's just me personally. Let's look at some altcoins. So we did have a request for RUNE last week. So let's have a look at RUNE. I'm just going to do a bit of range analysis on RUNE here. So we have the high that we had, this next most significant low before a bounce higher. I mean, for me, that's a pretty clean retest, right? We've thrown out of this range. We've come back, retested, and now we're pushing into this mid zone. I'd say it's potentially a bit of a higher risk area there for me to look to enter any trades. But for here, if we do start to see just a good general bit of accumulation here, there might be an opportunity here, just off of a bit of a dip and a drive to get in. Alternatively, this could just track higher, and then you start to see your accumulation pattern potentially up here. And that could potentially offer an easier place to enter the market as well. But yeah, RUNE's looking quite interesting. Zooming out, let's take a look where RUNE sits. Just on, wow, it really has run. I didn't think it'd move that much. Let's take a look top to bottom. I think we're missing a fib level again. Okay, so it's really hit that first trouble area as far as fibs go, which you can only really take with a grain of salt. I mean, if the whole market's moving higher, I can't see why RUNE wouldn't move higher. But I mean, there is reasons here to be cautious, specifically because we have had the top produce those toppy looking tails, and the subsequent monthly close below wasn't super convincing, if I'm completely honest, just because we closed below the previous month's low. So I probably would honestly sit on the sidelines. There's only 2 days left till the close of this month. But if we, again, were to close, I guess, above this level or this level with the monthly close that's coming, that would be, for me, I guess, a bullish line in the sand to then be betting on a retrace to move to these upper valuations. So that's kind of what I think of RUNE at the moment. Another one that I've been tracking is AVAX. So this had a great impulsive move at the start of this year, but it's just been in a bit of a range-bound period lately. That may or may not change, just simply due to the fact that the same thing of, I guess, same sort of price action as RUNE at the moment. We did have a range here. We did lose that range. We've reclaimed it. And guess for me, the most significant story of this is we're putting in the last high before we broke down. We're putting in higher highs here. And now we're also continuing to just, I guess, keep this general uptrend moving. So if this were to continue, I probably would wait for a bit more confirmation, probably maybe price to get above this previous high, because that would show that the market's happy to pay higher prices. I would then maybe be looking for an entry again to re-enter on this one. But this is an interesting chart because at the same time, you could see quite easily if it fails to get through these highs, it could in the next couple of days turn around and start to trek down. So that is interesting, especially if Bitcoin continues to keep moving as fast as it has moved in the last couple of days. That could potentially maybe spell a bit of trouble for some altcoins. But yeah, it's a bit interesting because I only think it's potentially likely to happen if TOTAL3 also has a couple of bad days here at this big cycle mid-range that we pointed out. There might be a precipitating factor for altcoins to look a little bit worse for where. So that's at cycle high, cycle low, cycle midpoint. Jump in on the daily here. Yeah, again, if we start to see failure to get above that higher, and we put in like just a single black day here, that could be just a very temporary retrace, but it could spell, quite a bit of a fall for some altcoins as well, push them a little bit lower. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. But that's all I got for tonight. If there's anything you would like to see, I guess, charted up or want to see more or less of, just leave a comment. Let me know below. I hope this was a bit helpful, insightful where we are right now. It does seem that there are signs that we could still head higher. But I think we've sort of identified clearly there's a couple of cracks to be watching for, ETF volumes and flows changing. Wow, we've talked about that for quite some time, as well as a couple of these key crypto altcoins. If they do start to show signs of weakness, we want to be just prepared there as well. But I mean, the overall trend we all know likely for the rest of this year is up and to the right. So, at the same time, you don't want to lose some of your positions if you have had them for a long time. But if you have been thinking about areas to sort of trim, take profits, it's pretty reasonable to think between now and a month after the halving, there's probably an opportunity to do so. And maybe look to reinvest that in something else that you might be tracking right now. But that's it from me. Hope you'll have a pleasant rest of your week, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.